Aufgabe, die dem Denken gestellt ist heute, wie ich es verstehe, ist in einer Weise neu, dass es eine ganz neue Methode des Denkens verlangt. Dieses Denken ist in der Sache sehr viel einfacher als die Philosophie, aber im Vollzug sehr viel schwieriger und verlangt eine neue Sorgfalt der Sprache.
The renowned philosopher Martin Heidegger lived for the whole of his life in the Black Forest area of southern Germany. He looked, talked, and often acted like a typical German farmer, but he thought like nobody else alive.
The moment one reads Heidegger, life is different afterwards. Now, there are lots of reasons why that's the case, but it has a lot to do with the power of the argument and its novelty. The "I can't imagine ever having thought that before" feeling. It just changes the way you view philosophy.
During the early 1920s, having broken decisively with the Catholic Church, Heidegger also began to distance himself from his mentor, Edmund Husserl. Whereas Husserl was intent on illuminating the innermost workings of the mind, Heidegger became convinced that what thinkers like himself should really be addressing was the ordinary person's everyday experience of the world. This conviction led him to write what is generally regarded as his masterpiece, the dense, evocative, strangely worded text known as Sein und Zeit, or to use its English title, Being and Time.
This work is a tour de force of philosophical writing. One can't help in reading it to be simply amazed and astounded. It also, viewed historically, was the moment in which phenomenology, that which hitherto had been the dominant philosophical mode of thinking, was called into question, but called into question in such a radical way that it became almost impossible to go back to phenomenology and continue with it.
At the heart of Being and Time, and therefore of Heidegger's philosophy as a whole, is one deceptively simple question. What is really meant by the verb to be? We all think we understand what we mean when we say that someone or something is. But do we? Or are we, as Heidegger thought, letting the familiarity of the word itself blind us to what is really the greatest mystery of all?
Do we, in our time, have an answer to the question of what we really mean by the word being? Not at all. But are we nowadays even perplexed at our inability to understand the expression being? Not at all. Our aim in the following treatise is to work out the question of the meaning of being, and to do so concretely. Our provisional aim is the interpretation of time as the possible horizon for any understanding whatsoever of being.
Immanuel Kant, no small figure, he had said that space and time were equally important. They were the way we organized our world. The very young Heidegger, never forget, he's writing this as a very, very young man, says not at all. Space is an almost insignificant category. Time is the mystery.
Time and human existence are inextricably linked, according to Heidegger. Our being, he says, is really a process of becoming. And this key insight leads him to reject the idea that there is such a thing as a fixed human essence.
Heidegger's major contribution in Being and Time is to show how the old Aristotelian essence of man as the rational animal is, in effect, an abstraction, because what comes first is man's own existence. And existence for Heidegger is nothing but this stretching, whereby we are constantly projecting ourselves into a future, always expecting things, always hoping things.
Heidegger is a man who first wanted to investigate how practical action shows that we're pulled ahead of ourselves into purposes that we're trying to fulfill, into tasks that we're working on. Think of a farmer in the Black Forest, for example, making a barrel. This is someone who has a future task that he's trying to fulfill, and he has a logic operating there that shows that the human being is actually extended ahead of himself. The ahead is where we really live, what we desire to do, what we anticipate, what we want this wood to turn out to be.
People who live and work in traditional rural communities have an instinctive grasp of their own humanity, according to Heidegger. They are fully absorbed in and connected to the world, but they are also a clear minority of the human race. Heidegger argues that most of us, especially those who live in big modern cities, tend to lose touch with our individuality. Forced to conform to patterns of mass behavior, we experience strong feelings of anxiety, he says, and end up leading what he calls inauthentic lives.
Most of us live what he called a life of one. One is one. One does this. One thinks that. One moves in this way. And he's saying to you, no, the I is not one. And this was, in the 1920s, sheer breathtaking prophecy before the great mass market detergence of standardized life and death which has swept over us. The consumerism even of our deaths, they don't belong to us anymore. And he gave the great warning. He said, as this soap powder spreads over the planet, over the universe, it will be almost impossible for you to be you and not just one.
Being and Time was to make Heidegger's name once and for all. But before it was even published, he started to be spoken of as an original and explosive thinker.